Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Was away the last couple of days. As you can see, I was kind of moving a few things around, trying to make a little bit of a studio out of the way of the rest of the house in the living room. So that's what I was doing. As you were probably aware, and you saw in the news, same as I did, the Vatican sent out a release saying that they were going to be returning some indigenous artifacts back to the communities as a gift, as a sign of a concrete sign of respect and solidarity moving forward. As you probably remember, back in 2022, the Pope actually visited Canada and met with various Indigenous communities. I remember he was out in Alberta, and they actually repaved one of the roads. Was kind of fun. Got the Pope pavement. So this gift back to Indigenous communities basically is a gift from the Vatican to the Cardinals, and as such is then will be given back to Canadians. But to quote, he says, who the Cardinals who are committed to ensuring that the artifacts are properly safeguarded, respected, and preserved. So from the Vatican to the Cardinals, so that will be interesting. The items will be being shipped out, will be packaged and begin being flown out in December. And they'll be going to the Canadian Museum of History in Quebec. So I'm not actually sure, and the statement's not actually clear as to once they leave the Vatican vaults, and they make their way back to Canada and go to the museum, if these items will actually get dispersed to Indigenous communities. They're not actually clear, other than coming back to Canada, what will happen to them next time. My expectation would be that they would go back to communities, but that's not actually what's specified in the article. What kind of struck me about the story was the wider scope, was that most of these items were collected back in the 20s, and some of them go back to the 1800s. And these items were, air quotations, gifted to the Vatican. We all know that most of these items were not gifted willingly by First Nations communities, but were really absconded with by the church and sent to the Vatican vaults for showcasing Indigenous culture, much like your culture's on display for public consumption, like a circus. So these items were gifted back to the Vatican as early as the latter half of the 1800s, right through the 1920s. What also struck me was that the overall number of these items, now it says, was over about 100,000 different articles were sent to the Vatican. Now, the article doesn't specify that these 100,000 items specifically came from Indigenous people in Canada, but it also doesn't say that it didn't. So, but that is a ridiculous number that they have over 100,000 items in their vaults from various Indigenous peoples and communities, and that they're just going to start to trickle them back and forth as gifts. And it's not a gift from the Vatican to a First Nations community. It's a gift from the Vatican to the Cardinals of Canada, who then will disperse them. The Vatican doesn't want to set a precedent that it's dealing directly in returning items to any specific people group, but more of an internal transfer among itself, of then which, if the Cardinals choose to give those items back to First Nations communities, hey, that's not the Pope's deal. That's the Cardinals' deal. I find that whole scenario in 2025, I understand their own political internal structures, but in the same statement saying that they want to create concrete relationships and they want to create, an environment of solidarity, they want to retract the doctrine of discovery or mitigate their impact in it, to turn around and say that, well, we understand that these items are yours. We're not going to address how we got them, and we're not going to give them directly back to you. You have to go through a bureaucratic process of internal church structure and then putting things into the hands of the Canadian Museum Institute to then further see if you can get them back to your community so that they can make sure that they're properly preserved and properly cared for and properly looked after. And I think it's all very disingenuous. I think the reality is they weren't their items in the first place. They took them largely by force. They have kept them in their vaults for private viewing or to treat it as, some other culture's display on for their pleasure. And then they want to return the items to ensure they're preserved. But the reality is, it's not their call. Those are possibly your community's items. And the reality is, if you wanted to take them and burn them in a giant heap, that would be your call. They come from your community. You're in charge of them. What you decide to do with them should be up to you, not up to the Vatican, not up to anyone other than your people and your culture. And so talking about this, constant conversation about solidarity and respect and acknowledging past histories is very disingenuous when at the same time we're like, they're saying to these communities, well, we don't really trust you can even look after these items, so we're going to make sure they're properly preserved and properly cared for as if they were still in the Vatican vaults. When it's not really, if you're talking about a relationship of equal partnerships, that would not be their decision. They took the items, they weren't willingly gifted. It should be just a straight line back to your community or the community from which they came to do with as they please. After all, they are the source of these items. And I'm happy they're preserved, but again, they're preserved for largely the benefit of the rest of us to observe. But anyway, that's my little take. I hope you're having a great day. Again, hit the like, subscribe. As always, we're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. If you find the show meaningful, please consider the Donate a Coffee program. And as always, the show is looking for sponsors, and you can help us out by subscribing, sharing. That really helps us beat the algorithm. As always, when you do these things, it helps us grow the show as well. So until next time, the jig is up. The Jig is Up is made possible in part by the Métis Federation of Canada, uniting Métis people from coast to coast to coast.